Our meeting to order. This is the Federal Way Land Use and Transportation Council Committee meeting scheduled for today, January 6th at 5 p.m. And let's see, we have our council president, Linda Kochmar, here on the far left, Councilman Jack Walsh, who's on the committee with me, Jack Dovey, and we have Hong Tran, the member, and over on the far right, we have Paul with us, who is our newest council member. Okay, we'll get started, and we'll first start.
I think Susan is going to be on Zoom.
I'm also here, Jack.
Oh, I see it now. And there is
Okay.
Lydia. So we have a full canoe. Everybody's here. So we'll, and you got on the video, please say something if I missed seeing that you want to make a comment. So first thing we'll do is go to public comment. This is where anybody can come forward and speak for 3 minutes. And do we have any public comment? Seeing none, we'll go to committee business. Does anybody on the dais have anything they'd like to bring up? No? So we'll go right into our first topic is item A, approval of the minutes from December 2, 2024.
I move to approve the minutes of December 2, 2024.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, we'll go to the item B, T-Mobile West LLC franchise ordinance. Mr. Elliott.
Good evening. I am Cole Elliott. I'm the Development Services Manager. Chairman Dovey, members of the council, members of the committee, I wish you a happy new year. We're here to discuss T-Mobile franchise. The policy question is, should we grant T-Mobile West LLC a franchise ordinance to place wireless transmitting facilities within and throughout the city? A little bit of background, T-Mobile West LLC has requested the franchise. They paid the $5,000 to negotiate this again. They need it in order to continue placing their wireless transmitting facilities throughout the city. This ordinance is to replace the previous ordinance, which is expiring this year. The term for this period is, again, another 10 years, commencing with the acceptance of this. The franchise is consistent with previous franchises granted by the city to T-Mobile and other utilities. The options to consider tonight are forward this franchise on to the city council meeting on January 21st for the first reading. Do not forward the franchise on for first reading and provide staff with some direction. The mayor's recommendation, of course, is to forward the franchise on for its first reading. Questions?
I don't see any, but I do have one.
Yes, sir.
Since it expires in 2025, is this effectively an 11-year agreement, or is it taking precedence over the last part of the year?
Legally, the time clock commences with your approval. So they're just losing the last half of the previous one.
So it's really a 9-year agreement, not a
It's
10 years.
actually a 10 years because
years.
it's 10 years clock driven from when you've approved it.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, Jack.
Go ahead, Susan.
I have two questions. One, what does the $5,000 cover? And secondly, one of the locations is called the Church of God at First Avenue South. First Avenue South, First Place South. And I looked that up, and that's a neighborhood. It's over by Lake Grove. There's not a church there. It's a bunch of houses. So is this in a backyard, or is it on the street over there, or is
All
the
of-
address incorrect?
Sorry. To answer your second question first, all of T-Mobile sites are leased sites that are outside of the right-of-way. Our primary connection with Public Works is just the connection from the power or the backhaul onto these sites. I'm sorry, I forgot your first question.
Well, before you leave the second question, it says it's Church of God, but it's a neighborhood, so I'm curious about that as to where it's located in this neighborhood, and if it's someone's house, if it's their property. And my first question was the $5,000 fee that they paid. What exactly does that cover?
The $5,000 fee covers the administrative staff time to negotiate this out. What we don't use up is always returned.
Okay.
As far as this location being the Church of God, I honestly will have to research it and get back to you.
Okay.
All right?
That'd be great. Okay,
You
thank
betcha.
you.
Hey, Susan, if I can make a comment, most of these negotiations and towers are now with the 5G, which are on telephone poles and things like that, and they're very much smaller than the old days of cellular towers, so it probably is on something close by, and it's not going to be big and all over the place where people see it.
Well, I'm just curious because I've driven on that street several times. There's not a church on there. It's just
Yeah.
single-family homes, so just curious where this is located at. Thank you.
Councilmember, can I jump in there?
Yes,
So I looked up, Councilmember Honda, I see what you're talking about. That's actually an exhibit from T-Mobile that they provided us. That's what they call the site name. It is a residential house, you're correct, and the address is correct for where that cell tower is located. And to Chair Dovey's point, it is a small 5G tower, and it is in front of a residential house. But that would be something between the property owner and T-Mobile of why they have named it that.
Okay.
But that is their designation for it, not a city-derived designation.
So does the property owner get a fee from T-Mobile to be there?
Typically, yes. Typically, there's a separate agreement that they're renting or leasing a space from the property owner that's outside the right-of-way for that tower.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for checking.
Council President Goldberg?
Well, I was just going to say, I looked up Church of God, and it's a synonymous with Christ Church or Grace Church, so lots of names that appear to be interchangeable. Maybe there used to be churches in houses. I don't know if they're still doing that, but goodness knows.
Okay, seeing no other questions, we have a motion? Yes.
Chair Dovey, I move to forward the proposed ordinance to the first reading on January 21st, 2025.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? No? Okay, it passes. Thank you, Cole. And now we'll go to item C, amendment to ExtendNet franchise ordinance number 2896.
Yes. In basically December of last year, December 18th to be exact, we received a request from ExtendNet, who we granted a franchise to in September of 2020, to relinquish their franchise by pulling their bond. After discussion with legal, we found that we had to go through the land use process and on to council. But the revision in this is typically, or the precedent set is that it could go forward on the consent agenda since an amendment to it and ending it. I'm open to questions on this one.
Okay, any questions from anyone? Do I have a motion? Seeing none.
I move to forward the proposed amendment to ordinance 2896 to the January 21, 2025 consent agenda for approval and mayor's signature.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, passes. We'll now move to item D, which is permit review and timelines, Senate Bill 5290, Title 18 subdivisions. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Dovey, Council President Kochmar, committee members, and council members. I'm Holly Bozak. I'm the planning manager, and I will be presenting Senate Bill 5290 to you this evening. There are going to be two parts to this presentation. So I'd like to ask if I can do both presentations and then hold off for questions and motions until the end, and I'll leave that up to you, Chair Dovey, to decide if that's the route you want to take.
So are you asking to do item D and E, or just item D?
D and E, and then
Together.
open it up for motions for both and questions and motions.
I have no problem with that. Everybody okay? Okay, so we're going to go item D and E and ask questions afterwards, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
Thank
you will follow that recommendation.
Okay, I appreciate that. So these are two items that are related to each other. The first presentation, part one tonight, is going to be on Title 18 and the amendments under Title 18 that are tied to Senate Bill 5290, which is the local project review and timeline bill from the state. So I'll do an overview of the bill for you tonight, and then I'll outline the amendments in Title 18 and provide the policy options and next steps.
Can I ask one thing first?
Sure.
On our screen, we have a little screen halfway in the middle. Can we move that up so it's not blocking it? You see what I'm saying? That little, there we go. Thank you.
Much better.
Okay, perfect.
That would be my only question.
So this bill, Senate Bill 5290, was passed in 2023, and it has three main components to it. Those components are tied to the timelines for permit project review, tied to fees, and also tied to the permit review process. The permitting timelines, the way that they are affected is that we have to either decrease or increase timelines based on what the state says is the associated and reasonable timeline for each permit type. The fees also had to be reviewed and assessed to be reasonable fees based on the amount of time staff requires for each type of review. And then we also had to make sure that we provide a consolidated review process, which allows streamlined review of each project type. So Senate Bill 52 outlines the timelines as you see here in the table. 65 days for any permit type that does not require, land use permit type that does not require public notice. 100 days for permit types that do require public notice, and 170 days for those land use permit types that require public notice and a public hearing. We reviewed the fees, and our fees in the City of Federal Way are reasonably less than most jurisdictions in King County, and so we will not have to make any additional changes other than those changes that were already made in the fee schedule. In addition, our permit review process already allows a consolidated review, and therefore we do meet those standards of the bill. So the main point of the bill that we had to address are the timelines, and I've outlined here the Title 18 impacts. So boundary line adjustments and lot line eliminations will be reduced from 120 days to 65 days, and that's 65 days to final decision. Binding site plans will be reduced from 120 days to 100 days, and again, that's for final decision. Your policy options this evening for the ordinance tied to Title 18 is to adopt the proposed ordinance, or do not adopt a proposed ordinance and provide staff direction. The Planning Commission recommendation was approval, and the mayor's recommendation was adoption of the proposed ordinance. I will now move on to part two. So I apologize for the lack of charisma in the second part of the presentation. It's going to look very much like the first part. I'm just going to outline for you the impacts to Title 19 and then move on to the policy options. So in Title 19, we have changes to the language tied to exemptions. So there are certain types of projects that will be exempt from the 65-day, the 100-day, and 170-day timelines. Those exempt projects will be those that have hearing examiner decisions and consultant reviews required. And we also had to assess the need for an additional timeline or an exemption for that. And that would be because it is almost impossible for cities to gauge how long consultant time is going to take. And we have less control over how a hearing examiner is going to reach their decision and the timeline required. In addition, the use process 2 timeline has been amended, and the use process 3 timeline. And I have those listed here. And again, your policy options are adopt the proposed ordinance for amendments to Title 19, or do not adopt proposed ordinance and provide staff direction. Recommendation is approval by both Planning Commission and Mayor. Now I will open it up for questions.
Councilmember McDaniel?
Yeah, good evening.
evening.
Couple quick questions. The first one I'm going to have is you mentioned that it was a lower fee. Do you know what the differences in fees were compared to the comparables you did?
So I can give you a couple examples. I looked at our neighboring jurisdictions, and I've also worked in some of our neighboring jurisdictions. So when I came to Federal Way, I was actually quite surprised by the difference in fees here. And I believe that that is because we are looking to create an environment where developers aren't feeling like they're being gouged to come here and build. So for instance, sign fees in the city of Federal Way are $88, whereas in Des Moines, they're $170, and in Kent, they're $357. So that's one example that kind of shows a vast difference. It's kind of all over the scale there. Short plats, here they're $4,403. In Des Moines, they're $6,565. And in City of Kent, it's based on the size of the short plat. So if it's 2 to 4 lots, it's a lower fee, which is around the $4,000 mark. But if it's beyond 4, it's over $9,000. Site plan review in Federal Way is $3,963. In City of Des Moines, it's based on valuation of the project as well as in Kent. So in Des Moines, it's capped at $20,500, and Kent they just have a rolling basis. So they calculate their fees based on what the valuation of the project is at time of application,
Interesting.
which is going to be somewhere around what Des Moines also does.
Gotcha. Thank you for that information. And then my other questions are so they've lowered, now, if I understand this correctly, we've lowered the response time from the city to the person putting in the permits. Is that just to speed up the process, or what was the motivation for us?
Based on what I've heard and read, there has been a lot of lobbying at the state for permit processing to become quicker. As you may or may not know, developers, time is money. Mm-hmm. And so if reviews are taking 120 days or longer, each of those days is costing them. And so the state is trying to address that issue for developers. Master Builders has been lobbying as well to get these changes made, and this is the state's response.
Gotcha. Going from 120 to 65 is cutting it practically in half. That seems like a pretty drastic cut. How much of a burden is this going to put on permitting, or is this going to be within a realistic? I mean, that's, like I said, it's 50%. In my mind, it's just a percentage number, but what's the realization of that?
We will definitely feel it. I think, the way that we are to approach this based on what the state says is this coming year, we need to keep track of the timelines for each type of review, and then we need to report back to the state after this year and let them know, if we're able to actually accomplish those timelines. I think this first year is a little bit of a test, and the state is trying to gauge whether or not what they've put out there is feasible. Some of these lower level projects can be reviewed in 65 days. The issue is that we don't review projects typically on the type of review. We typically review them on, first in, first out. So that we might have to adjust the way that we approach our project reviews in that term.
Okay. And then my last question is, in the ordinance, when we made the adjustment from the 120 to 65, we just literally crossed out the 120, made it 65. But in the second one, it has literally the 120 days cut out, and it says RCW. Is the reason why, is it easier to point back to the RCW, or is it the wording in the RCW replaces the 120?
I believe the section you're talking about is written that way due to nuances in the RCW that we wanted to capture in the code that wouldn't necessarily be captured simply by crossing out timelines.
Where is that specifically, Councilmember?
It'd be on page 72 on this one. It'd be page 6 of the second ordinance. Number 2, it says project exempt from 120 days, and it has that crossed out, and then it has RCW 36.70B.080.
That's because previous to this new law, that RCW only had a single timeline, so it basically said all project permits must be done within 120 days. Now that RCW says there are 3 different sets of timelines, 65, 100, or 120. So to simplify that, instead of putting projects exempt from the 65, 120, or 165, or whatever that third one is, we just reference the RCW so that we'd be referencing all 3 of those categories.
Just makes it a lot cleaner then.
Exactly, just simply to make it fewer words in the code.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Okay, Councilman.
My question's pretty similar. I definitely like the idea of timelines being shortened. Anything that we can do to help with that, I think is good. My only concern is just on staffing. And do you think is there a realistic possibility we may need to increase staffing in order to accomplish this?
That is a possibility, and I think we're going to know the answer to that within the next few months.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Tran?
Jack already asked me.
Yes, questions.
I have a question.
Okay, you're going to go after Linda down here.
Okay.
Well, they've already asked all the questions, but the one I've got is, so the legislature, in its infinite wisdom, has implemented a timeline or a guideline. What happens if we don't meet it?
Luckily, the city has already implemented a lot of aspects of this particular bill, and so we are not under as much scrutiny or liability from the state as other jurisdictions. So the fact that we have certain processes in place already kind of is our safe harbor. So other jurisdictions that do not have a condensed review process and reasonable fees and the other aspects of the bill that I noted, they are subject possibly to a 10 to 20% refund of fees taken in if they don't meet the review timelines.
Refund to the developer?
Correct.
Interesting.
Okay, Susan, your turn.
Thank you. So I had several of the same questions that Paul had, but in your experience in other jurisdictions have had higher prices and perhaps a longer time to review plans, do they have more development or less development than we'd have? Will this actually increase our likelihood of having more developers come here if we've always had the lower fees?
I would say that development is largely driven by the location, and I mean, most of the cities I've worked at in Washington have been in King County. That said, the level of development in each of those jurisdictions has been pretty high. I've also worked in Snohomish County, again, a lot of development. These jobs have all been in the last decade, and the development in King County and Snohomish and Pierce County has been kind of out of control in the past decade, as you all may already know. So I think it's pretty comparable. I would say that the difference that I notice in Federal Way is that there is less of a frustration in terms of the way that the developers approach us as compared to some of the other jurisdictions I've worked in.
So you would say that we have, our development is on track with the other cities in King County that you've worked in?
I would say so, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I do have one follow-up question. Going from 120 to 65, which is a big drop, and hearing what you said that and those are mostly for short plats and smaller projects, I'm assuming, correct? The
The
time.
65-day timeline is for level land use process 1 and 2, so those are like our easiest land use projects to review.
Right.
Not plats, but
Yeah.
other types of land use
They're
projects.
easy one, well, nothing's easy, but they're easier. And you said that our fees are less than most other places you've worked at or around the communities. If we find that it impacts us, would it be 1 or 2 people we would have to add? I mean, because if our fees are the lowest and we're going to get impacted because we do a good job, hopefully everybody comes here and says, I want to do development, but we just went through a budget where we're like razor thin tight. What's it going to cost us if all of a sudden the floodgates open and we can't meet 65? I mean, that's 2 people's probably $250,000 in loaded costs, I'm guessing. I mean, what should we be thinking about?
I don't think we're quite at the stage where we need to assess how many planners we may need to bring on. I think that we have a really hard-working crew of planners here, and they try really hard to make things happen. Every single one of the planners here, and I honestly have not seen that before. So I think we are really lucky in the staff that we have.
Okay.
And I would be surprised if they did not get very close to or meet the requirements.
Okay.
And again, I said in the next few months, we're going to
Yeah.
have a better estimate of whether or not we're able to meet these timelines. I would say due to the fact that some of these timelines are cutting timelines in half, that would look something like 1 to 2 planners.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Walsh?
Yeah, I was just going to comment that kind of along the line that Council President Kochmar was saying. I like the idea of shorter timelines and helping the developers there. The idea of the legislature dictating to us what we need to do, that part I don't like. But anyway, I guess that even when they do things that I wish they didn't do, occasionally something good can come of it.
Okay.
I would say we have a few of these types of bills coming your way, so.
Okay, do I have a motion? Councilman Tran?
Chair Dovey, for the record, this motion is for item D, permit review and timeline, SB 5290, Title 18 subdivision. I move to forward the proposed ordinance to the first reading on January 21st, 2025.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, now we'll go to the motion for number E. Councilmember Walsh?
I move to forward the proposed ordinance to first reading on January 21, 2025.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, thank you very much. And now we'll move on to item F, initiation of development agreement for the proposed LDS temple. Mr. Niven.
Good evening and Happy New Year, Committee Chair Dovey, committee members Walsh and Tran, Council President Kochmar, and council members Keith Niven, Community Development Director. So tonight we're going to talk about potentially a development agreement for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for property they own in the city. So the policy question in front of the City Council is, should the City Council initiate negotiation of a development agreement with the LDS Church for a temple in Federal Way? The church currently owns 3 parcels located in the south part of the city, just west of I-5. This is Todd Beamer High School's to the north. And you can see these parcels on the screen here. The faint orange line represents property lines, so there's actually 3 parcels that make up property currently owned by the church. It's approximately 12 acres, sorry, can't read my notes. And they plan to build a 2-story 43,000 square foot temple on the property. Property is currently zoned RS35. It has a base height of 30 feet and a maximum height of 55 feet. There is not a site plan in front of us today. This is just a conversation about should we start sitting down and negotiating a development proposal and development agreement with the church. there are members, I assume you guys are with the church. There's a group of folks here that could answer questions about the project if you have those. The mayor's recommendation is option one, which is to authorize negotiation and development agreement for the proposed LDS temple. And with that, I am done with my presentation.
Yeah, for comparable, what does 43,000 square feet look like?
43,000 square feet is roughly an acre.
An acre? Like, do we have a I'm trying to like visualize that size of a building.
Sure. This building is 88,000 square feet.
It's about half of this.
Basically, yeah. So
Okay.
think about half.
All right. And then my other question is going to be is the traffic flow and then parking, like how much activity is going to go? Because I drive that little road every now and then. It's not a major traffic
Kind of like
road.
Country Road, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm assuming this is the old nursery location. Yeah, I like that location. So I'm just curious to know, like, what size, or since we don't have the map, like, what are we looking at for, like, square footage, not square footage, but, like, layout for the parking, how many people, like, flow of traffic going back and forth in that area?
Sure. All those pieces are part of the actual development agreement, and there'll be a conceptual plan, either a conceptual plan or a development plan. We haven't even gotten down to talking about those type of details with the church yet. But all of those details will be part of kind of that subsequent discussion, which will happen over the next, they get to drive the timeline, maybe say 6 months or so, give or take.
I'm looking forward to seeing it then. Thank you.
Yep.
Councilmember Honda, I saw you raised your hand.
Thank you. First of all, why would we or they want a development agreement and not just come to us with their plans? And I'm also concerned about the traffic, especially with Todd Bieber there. And those roads are just, I don't even know how you could fix those roads to have more traffic on them.
Okay, so a lot of questions there. First question was why a development agreement? I'm going to actually ask someone from the church to come up and address that. I think that would be better coming from them since they're the ones that are asking for the development agreement.
Good evening, members of the committee and chair. My name is William Lynn. I'm here on behalf of the church. I'm a Tacoma land use lawyer. Been doing this for quite a while and worked on a number of development agreements. Basically, the reason for a development agreement is that it gives both sides a little more flexibility to address development issues. It's totally up to the city whether or not the city wants to sign the agreement. In the end, it'll come back before you as a completed negotiated document, and then you'll have the opportunity to take it or not. The primary advantage from the city's perspective is that it allows the city to determine that there are public benefits associated with the project that warrant whatever changes are made to the applicable standards. So it basically allows a customized zoning based on a very specific proposal on a very specific site. These temples are a little bit different, and I'm new to this, so let me explain how I understand them. I think it directly relates to the traffic question. A typical church of a different denomination has big Sunday services that attract a lot of people, a big mass of people, and have to account for that in their traffic planning. A temple is a very different facility. It's not used for large gatherings of people. Despite the size, the building is actually broken into a number of smaller rooms which are used for the highest covenants and rights of the church. So it's not a big assembly of people, and in fact, it's closed, I think, typically on Sunday and Monday. So these are smaller groups, family weddings, other ordinances and rights of the church. So the traffic is more spread out. The facility here would provide an opportunity for people really throughout the region, members of the church, to gather for these smaller assemblies. So you don't have the kind of traffic impacts that you might expect. So a development agreement allows you, the council, through the work of your staff, to kind of negotiate a very specific development plan for a most unusual use. I mean, your zoning codes, and I've worked with lots of them, are written for what's ordinary, and this is not ordinary by any means. And so it seems appropriate to us that we talk through that very specifically. I will say that although the church itself, the temple itself, is not open to the public after the initial kind of open house period, the grounds are generally open to the public, and they're beautifully landscaped and a real attraction to the city, something that benefits everybody. So that's one of the things we'll look forward to talking about with the city, along with the design and the specific impacts like traffic. So happy to answer questions. I'm also accompanied by people who know more about it than I do, so happy to turn it over to them as well.
I have a follow-up question, if that's okay.
Yes, Susan?
So does the zoning have to be changed for this to be built? And is that why the development agreement is important to the church?
I'm sorry, does the building have to be changed? Would it have to be changed to meet?
Does the zoning
Yeah.
have to be changed?
No. The zoning specifically allows for churches through a conditional use permit process. I'm sorry.
Keith, Keith, maybe.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm speaking out of
Let's
turn here.
let's let Keith answer that
That's
question and not put you
probably
on the
better.
spot.
All right.
Thank you.
My ventriloquism isn't working very well. So churches are an allowed use within the SE 35 zone, or the RS 35 zone. So it's allowed by right. The conversations and the topics that will probably be covered by the development agreement might, for example, include building height. Because it's kind of a lower density residential zone, the building height is 30 feet. I'm going to guess that's not going to work for the church. So we will be talking about some of the specifics within the zoning code as it relates to standards, not the use itself. The use itself is allowed.
So, Keith, would the people who live over there have the opportunity to let us know their feelings about that?
So a development agreement is a process that requires public notice. So there will be a noticing opportunity.
And there's also a formal public hearing in front of City Council before any approval of the development agreement, which comments specific to this from the general public could be received and considered by council.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your answers.
Okay, any other questions of anyone? I know, Mr. Walsh, you want to?
I'm going to recuse myself from this vote.
Yeah, got it. Okay, do I have a motion? Do you have anything else, Mr.?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Mr. Tran, do I have a motion to move forward?
Chair Dovey, I move to forward the request to the January 21st consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
The
you.
motion passed and will be on the consent
And you
agenda.
want to note that one recusal.
What's that?
You want to note one recusal.
Oh, excuse me, I thought he said that, so it was noted, but I will note that Councilmember Walsh
got it.
recused himself. Okay, now we'll move on to information only. Item G, update of the city response process to the Seattle Airport Substantial Master Plan. Mr. Vadino.
Happy New Year,
Happy New Year.
Chair Dovey, council members. So this is a update for you all and the public. We'll have a lot more action to deal with February, March, April as we approach the second stage. But basically, this is to give you and the residents and the businesses who are watching an update. The Port of Seattle continues their public process. We just finished the federal part. And then we move into, it's a three-quarter game, the second quarter, which will be the state SEPA, and then there'll be the Port Commission weighing all this later in the year. So as you all know, you folks, the council sent a response letter by December 13th, and we're anticipating what we brought up and what other cities and other people, residents brought up, businesses, we'll get a written response. And then we'll be able to, at least respond to it, even though we'll be able to sort of look at it, and that'll help us and inform us on the state process. And for you, and of course, the letter emphasized the fact that there's all these projects going on. And of course, because it was the federal process, They were, one, concerned about impact of these projects as they were being built, but then also they look at what happens once the projects are done. However, the federal measurement, which is something we're trying to change in Congress and with the president eventually, the sound contours for the federal program are more based and noticeable down around SeaTac and around the airport and not here. But that's something we'd like to change federally. But as you know, they're projecting a large amount of passengers, more greater noise and health impacts on our city. We also thanked them for something, and as you know, and some people in the public may not know, as a couple people in Marine Hills noted that one of the the original runway was coming in at a shallower angle, causing more noise over parts of Marine Hills, but Steel Lake and that area, and a lot of that housing that's along there along 99. So one project is going to raise that descent angle, which is a good thing for us. But basically, we're gonna play this in a way where we're partners with the port, but we need a balanced approach. Yes, we have to have a successful airport, but it has to be done safely, not only for the air we breathe, but also for the noise that we absorb. And just as a review, it's a three-part process. We finished part one, there's 2 more to go. The next one will be probably between April and June. We will begin what started last time, which will be their document, the state document will be released. We will delve into that and give you our recommendation with lots of specifics and lots of recommendations for the port. There'll be, we'll advocate for a public meeting in Federal Way once again. I think it'll be, ours were well attended, it'll be much more well attended, and we can really put in front of them what these projects will do, because the bottom line is, I think as we've talked before, not off the record, it would be great to have a way to, I hate the word mitigate, take care of the air particulates that are going to our schools and our businesses and our homes, and also figure out what can be done to have the installation programs apply to our city, because we are under the flight path. But right now, it's only acknowledged for SeaTac. And the good news there is, as the state legislature starts up next week, I believe there will be action by ours and other legislators, Des Moines, et cetera, about coming up with solutions that would be a partnership, the port, the state. And even though the state's got a tight budget, I think a lot of the port funding might be able to be used in a way to take care of these things. So that's something where we'll be probably by February, we'll have a really good knowledge of that. In fact, in the next couple of weeks, and we'll take care of that. And then, of course, after that, the third part is the Port Commission later in the year. And what I'm thinking is, as this project unfolds with the state and what we're looking at and the kinds of solutions we're looking for, we basically encourage our citizens and businesses and even ourselves to start showing up at all the Port Commission meetings and giving them the stories and the examples. And 2 commissioners have been to Nautilus Elementary and have seen and been there under the flight path. And of course, when you know it's going to go up exponentially, that's something that I think concerns them. So how do we come with the help them, et cetera. So that's our last and important piece. So we're going to now continue to analyze what comes out, not only the federal piece to look for some daylight there, but also when the state piece comes out. And then that'll help us, land use and the council, to come up with a strategy. And of course, the bottom line is, as we've said before, what can we do about noise challenges with this expansion and what's going on now? What can we do for emissions and ultrafine particle situations that are exposing our residents? What about the late night noise? I mean, right now we serve on a group that it's sort of on the honor system, but we still have late night noise. It's sort of voluntary, but what can we do to have that be taken care of? And then, of course, as I alluded to before, what's going on federally about how noise is calculated. I mean, right now it's a day-night average, when this is a game of frequency, and that's what's bothering our residents, is over and over and over. And with all these additional flights, we need to change it from a day-night average to frequency, and how that can be taken care of too. And there's a lot of creative ways that we can talk about this, as we move forward. So anyway, I will be here in February if we have some sort of idea that we can work on to start to advocate, and especially as we look to see what's going on with the state. So at this point, any questions or thoughts or direction?
Councilmember McDaniel?
One quick question. I know at one time when this conversation was about changing the measurement device or the way they measure the decibels. Is that, as I understand
Yeah,
it
that's
correctly?
what I was alluding to is right now, they do the decibels, but they do it on an average during a day versus frequency.
Oh, that was the frequency part you were talking about?
Yeah,
just
so
the
that's
actual testing?
frequency, like, perhaps we have in Green Hills 50 landings. Well, you can see what they're going to increase it to. And so coming up with something that acknowledges that versus just the frequency, just by the airport, them hitting the decibels, have it be a combination of decibels and frequency.
Got you. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Bill, thank you very
so
much.
much.
Look forward to more.
Me too.
Okay, we'll move on to item H, is the progress updates on sound transit projects in Federal Way. Mr. Smith.
Good evening, council members, committee members. So I am Ken Smith with the Public Works Department, the Sound Transit Liaison for the city. I'm here for the January updates for sound transit activities in the city. So for everything essentially north of 317th, outside the city center. They're still working on some comms, electrical testing, a lot of punch list items along the corridor, so mostly wrapping up a lot of their work. Installation of final frontage improvements is ongoing along Military Road. I think they put in the curb and storm, and they'll proceed to street lighting and sidewalks. Storm pond work and emergency access work is finishing up in a couple locations. And the traffic mitigation project along South 272nd Street is ongoing. For City Center, the final leg of the new roundabout at 23rd and 317th, that construction is underway. We got two-way traffic going for now. It's kind of in a temporary shifted configuration, but after they finish that final leg, it'll move into a more permanent configuration, and then they'll work on the splitter islands and then the center island and then be complete. Roadway work for 22nd, South 319th, and South 318th, which is kind of the center of the area next to the station, is continuing. They're just finishing up a lot of the sort of ancillary facilities like the sidewalks, the curb, and specific spots as they get ready for opening the station. The new bus loop construction is ongoing. They're just installing some site lighting, a lot of small sections of decorative concrete paving. For the station, still working on site signages, furnishings, guardrails, communication devices, and some painting. And then I do expect the final artwork to be installed in 2025. I know some of it is fabricated, and they're just waiting for the timeline for when the contractor has the point of the station done that they can install it. Final stormwater work on the south side of South 320th, expected to start within the next 2 weeks. That they're doing I think some lane shifts and closures on the south side of 320th, but it's expected to be off hours, normal traffic. And then final site work for the end-of-line facility, bus driver relief building, and the garage, nearly complete, and then just doing final punch work. For the operations and maintenance facility south, city's continuing to work on the development agreement, and they've started the right-of-way vacation process. We're just proceeding. And then just lastly, just continuing to collaborate on the relocation of the BPA power transmission lines, as well as the city center access project. For Tacoma Dome Link Extension, the draft environmental impact statement, the comment period is active right now, so it's started December 13th, running through February 10th. For the January 21st City Council study session, Sound Transit will be here to talk about that DEIS, as well as myself, so we'll have some more further discussion at that point, and I'll answer any questions.
Councilmember McDaniel?
Yeah, quick question. We met with the Sound Transit, a couple of their representatives. Do you remember what that was? Was it last year at some point? I'll say October, November, maybe something like that.
Yes, I think it was around October.
Okay, during that period of time, we had some questions for them about getting a list of the potential buyers of the property down there. I still have not seen an email on that. I'd be curious to know where a status on that is and what that list is. If you don't mind CCing me next time you hit them up, I'd like
Sure,
to
yeah,
see
I
that.
thought it had been forwarded over to council. I'll check on it.
Have not seen it. Thank you. Oh, and the other thing is I do not know what the next project is that they do, but the way they did the development of 23rd Avenue South and South 317th has to be one of the most dangerous places to drive at night, not knowing which road you're supposed to be driving. I have literally gone into almost a head-on collision twice now, not knowing what road. It was poorly, poorly done.
Yeah, we've
Please
got
pass
some,
that on.
We've had some comments from citizens as well. We're working on some potential changes right now, so.
All right.
Councilmember Walsh?
Yeah, kind of back to that 23rd and 317th. When do they figure that it will be completely done? I mean, because it is a mess.
It'll be in the roundabout configuration pretty soon. I think it's within the month is the expected time when it'll switch. I can get a better timeline and get back to you.
Okay, all right. And then I was talking to Keith about this earlier today, but on the Tacoma Dome Link extension, with the I mean, they have the 4 possible routes with that. Once the EIS is done, what kind of time frame are we looking at getting a preferred route?
They will. The expectation, I believe, is around the May timeframe of this year when they will select the preferred alternative. After that, it's a couple of other decisions before they actually select the final configuration. But I think they expected 27 to have that selected finally. So it's a little bit off, but they'll at least we'll have a better idea because they'll select a preferred alternative. In theory, it should be around May of this year.
Okay, all right, thank you.
If I could add, with the 21st and following up on Councilmember McDaniel's comment, the RFPs for the TODs are going to be going out in mid-February, and I would really like to see us have a presentation on that in case the city decides it wants to put an RFP in and be part of the bidding for those parcels of land that are going to be coming up. I think we're in a vacuum right now. It's going to happen. Maybe some council members here, like I, would like to participate in, I would like to see the city purchase some of those. I may be the only one. But I think we're kind of in this 6-week period where we have to really know what's going on because that's going to hit us pretty hard pretty soon. And maybe Mr. Niven can run that up the chain of the side over at the mayor's office or whatever we do, and the council here may be thinking about it, but it's something we should be considering so we don't wake up on the 22nd and the RFPs have already been done and we haven't done anything to be part of it.
Yeah, I can certainly reach out to Sound Transit and see if they're interested in presenting to us.
Yes, Councilman.
So one of the ideas is with the public market and discussions about senior housing. I think somebody from the public market told me that one of those TOD properties was contaminated. And so I'm wondering, the Korean Women's Association parcel was leased to the KWA for $1 a year for 40 years. So it's a nonprofit. And so if we make our public market a nonprofit and have them lease it the way they gave it to, and then have senior housing above it, that's going to solve some of our problems because the seniors are going to be taking light rail, they're not going to be having cars as much as others, and relieve some emphasis on the schools. So that's one of the ideas we're kind of tossing around. So heck darn, they leased it to KWA, they can certainly talk to us.
And maybe my comment is, I'm not so saying what it should or shouldn't be, but we should be looking at it for housing, because we definitely need to bring housing in and participate. And I just don't want to wake up on the day after the RFPs and we're not at the table trying to be part of the solution. Councilmember Walsh?
Yeah, do we know if with the RFPs, will they be specifying the percentage of low-income housing in the RFPs?
That's a good question. I believe they because of their 80-80-80 rule, there's some requirements in there that they have to put in, but I'm not entirely sure.
But with that rule is for the 80-80-80 system-wide,
Right.
not just right here. And so it'd be great to know how they're going to implement that here with the RFP for Federal Way.
Maybe we should ask Frank Chalk to come down and talk to us about it, since he's the one who pioneered it and he's the expert. But anyway,
I have a question.
yes, go ahead, Susan.
So on PVR Way, where the road has the dividers to it, and you
Yes.
can only turn one lane off of 320th onto that road, when would that go back to its original configuration?
My understanding is that we were trying to encourage them to change it back before the moratorium started. They indicated that based on the way that the traffic numbers have still not back to normal on 23rd, they want to keep it as is for a little bit longer. So the expectation then is when the roundabout is complete and that traffic is unencumbered on 23rd Avenue, they'll change the configuration back at PVR.
And then when the buses go back to the original routes?
Yes, for the most part. I believe some things are going to change slightly as they get to this transition point when with the buses move to the new station area, the new drop-off location. But they'll be mostly the normal routes that they used to travel.
So will the buses move to their new location before the train station opens?
Yes. They need to in order to complete the demo of the existing existing bus station and complete the roadway network of the rest of 317th that extends all the way to 21st.
And so my last question is, I understood of the 4 surplus lots that Sound Transit has, 2 of them are contaminated?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And that they're going to be withheld until the contamination could be corrected
So
before they will be sold? Is that true?
Yes, they need to be mitigated. One of them is a requirement for BPA to mitigate. So there's a negotiation that they need to have with whoever will end up developing the property, as well as BPA, to get it mitigated before they develop it. BP? Oh, sorry, BP, not BPA. BP. The other property is, they're still investigating the contamination. It was from the former dry cleaner that was there, so they don't fully know the mitigation yet. So that's the bigger parcel.
So a developer talked to me recently about the properties and said that he, as a developer, would rather buy all 4 instead of just 2. Because he'd be concerned if he bought 2 and not knowing what would happen to the other 2, and that it's not unusual for developers to buy property that's contaminated and fix it themselves. So is there a reason that that's not happening here?
I think based on the timeline, because they do not know how long negotiations with BP will take place, or how it will take, as well as they still don't know the full extent of the contamination for the other parcels, so they don't know those timelines well enough, but they would like to get some of the development done first. And it's kind of up to Sound Transit to decide how they want to do it, as well as their board. So that's my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, and you've got lots of input, we'll move on to the next item, item I.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, which is park impact fees methodology update. Mr. Lewis.
All
All right. Good evening, Committee Chair Dovey, Council Members Tran and Walsh, and other council members present. This is the wrong PowerPoint slide. Just give me 1 second.
Thought we approved that.
That's the problem with using the same formats on PowerPoints.
I know your slides are much more exciting.
They're equally as exciting.
Or equally as exciting. You probably got the blue and white also, right?
Yep. Here. All right. There we go. All right. This is an information-only briefing on the park impact fee methodology update. We'll give some brief background and then hand it off to the FCS group, who is on the line right now to go into more detail on the methodology update. And we'll end with a couple policy proposals and next steps. So just some background. The park impact fee, the city adopted its park impact fee in 2023. And there were three components of that. One was a new zoning code chapter that administers that park impact fee, a park impact fee study, and that study established a maximum allowed park impact fee of $2,839 per dwelling unit. And then an updated fee schedule, which established the city's adopted park impact fee. And the city chose to adopt a lower impact fee than what we could adopt. We adopted a park impact fee of $2,200 per residential unit, which is about 78% of what we could potentially charge if we wanted to. So Senate Bill 5258 was passed last year, or actually 2023, 2 years ago, which was one of a suite of piece of legislation that was intended to increase housing production in the state. What this does is it requires that impact fees reflect the proportionate impact of new housing units. So we can't just charge one fee per unit. It has to be based on the proportionate impact. And it provided some options for meeting that requirement. And what we're proposing is a method based on the square footage of the dwelling units. And FCS will go into more detail on that. We did consider a separate method, which was based on the number of bedrooms. But there's the potential for a lot of quarreling and misunderstandings about what a bedroom is. So there's a specific definition, but I guess it provides more opportunities to sort of game that system as far as calling something not a bedroom when it actually is a bedroom. Square footage is simpler, and it eliminates some of that ambiguity and likely back and forth that would take place if it was by bedroom. So with that, I'll hand it off to FCS group and Zach Hazel and John Ghilarducci. And why don't you test your audio?
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right.
And I have control of the screen, so just say next slide, and I'll click when you're ready to go forward.
All right, thank you, Evan, and thank you, committee members. We'll start with a real quick refresher on impact fees, which I know will be quickly review the scaling language in the RCW, talk about our approach, the theory, and then quickly summarize the math, and we have some comparables for you. Next slide, please. So what is an impact fee? As you know, these are the one-time fees paid by new development at the time of development. Key language in the middle there: cannot exceed that new development's proportionate share of the improvements that will serve new development. There are also many other rules in the RCW about spending the money, what other considerations we have to make in calculating the charges. We followed those very closely when we did the impact fee calculations in 2023. Next slide, please. So the new language is shown here, as Evan summarized. What the state is requiring that the impact fee schedule reflect the proportionate impact of new housing units. Basically, they want us to scale them by the dwelling unit size and square footage, number of bedrooms, or trips generated. Clearly, the trip generation approach would be targeted to the transportation impact fee. And as Evan mentioned, we tend to favor the square footage approach. We'll show you why in a minute. There's really good data correlating occupancy and square footage, and number of bedrooms presents a few other problems, as Evan mentioned. The goal is to produce a proportionally lower impact fee for smaller housing units. Makes sense. Generally, they have fewer occupants and in theory would demand less of the park system. There is also newer language, a couple years old now, limiting charges for accessory dwelling units to no more than 50% of the impact fee that would be charged to the primary or principal unit on that property. So that's not addressed specifically in our math, but is an important change to the code. Next, please. So the theory that we've used is based on this data, and we have similar data in several metropolitan areas. It all looks generally the same. There's a real good correlation as you move house size or dwelling unit size in square feet along the x-axis. A strong correlation between house size or dwelling unit size and the number of occupants, which you see on the y-axis. Interestingly, as you get up to larger dwelling unit sizes, 2,500, 3,000 square feet, that correlation flattens out, and you can no longer correlate the number of occupants with the dwelling unit size. So that acknowledgement of that effect is what sets the cap on the impact fee that you'll see in a minute. And on the bottom end, we try to create the floor with the size that would be equivalent to one occupant. So it's very important, because impact fees are technically rates, that these limits and scaling be data-based in our belief, and not be arbitrary, I guess is the naughty word in impact fees and rates. So we have created here what we believe to be a defensible data-based approach. Next slide, please. So using that information and the correlation to create the floor and the ceiling, we are able, with the additional information of the average dwelling unit size in Federal Way and the average occupancy per dwelling unit in Federal Way, we can create the equivalent of a park impact fee per square foot and be able to derive what that theoretical occupancy would be. So the PIF, and this one is calculated, you see that red dot in the middle of the slide, 2,839. That was the maximum defensible fee that we calculated in the study in 2023. The city chose to go with a slightly reduced rate, which we'll show you on the next slide, but for the purposes of this one, we used that maximum defensible charge per dwelling unit, and we could calculate a park impact fee per square foot of $1.68. That would theoretically equate to 0.0016 occupants in that 1 square foot. The floor, proposed floor of 622 square feet is the equivalent of 1 occupant, and the resulting park impact fee for dwelling units up to 622 square feet would be that $1,047.57. Of course, you can round and things like that, but this is just the raw math. The maximum park impact fee, as set by where that correlation ends between the number of occupants and the size of the dwelling unit, that would equate to a little over 5 occupants, and that park impact fee would be $5,260.92, as it would be for any dwelling unit at that size or larger, because we can't correlate that with occupancy. So this, the result of this math would be a park impact fee of $1.68 with a floor for up to 622 square feet of that almost 1,050 per dwelling unit, and then a maximum for dwelling unit size 3124 square feet and above, $5,260.92. Next slide, please. So this one, we applied the same math to the city's current park impact fee, which was the one that was adopted in 2023, that being $2,200 per dwelling unit in the city of Federal Way. That results in a park impact fee per square foot of $1.31, and you see the resulting minimum and maximum park impact fees. They scale the same, basically using the same math, just a lower dollar amount. So that minimum would be $811.84, and the maximum $4,077.07. Next slide, please. So we've updated a slide with some comparable jurisdictions so that you know what's going on in the region. And I can tell you a few of these. For example, we are working with the city of Kirkland right now on a park impact fee update. We're also working with Bonnie Lake, Maple Valley, and Fife, who aren't shown here, but they will at one point adopt, I shouldn't say that with certainty, we believe they will at some point adopt new park impact fees, and they will also have a scaling as we're proposing here. Some of these others haven't done it yet, and you see Everett's doing it by bedrooms, Camas by square footage. We worked with the city of Camas on that one, and then several others, which will, Sammamish is about to undertake an impact fee update that will include parks, and you can bet that a number of these others will as well. But just to give you an idea of what the fees are right now, at the end of 2024, here they are. Of course, we don't know how these may change in the future or even the near future, except for those ones I just mentioned. Next slide, please. And that's it for us. Back to Evan. Zach, I should introduce, was the analyst on this and did the heavy lifting, so he'll help with any analytical questions.
Just a couple more slides, and then FCS will stay on the line if there's any questions. So, given that presentation, staff is proposing, so there's a couple ways to achieve this new method and still equal the park impact fee that was adopted 2 years ago. So what we're proposing is adopt the PIF scaling method, where an average unit equals the maximum allowed park impact fee. So that was the first scale that FCS presented, where that average unit size in Federal Way would result in a park impact fee of our maximum allowed PIF of $2,839. And then staff, what we would do when we're actually applying the fee at the time of, basically at the permit counter, is apply a discount to equal the equivalent of that other scale that FCS presented, which was equal to $2,200 per unit. So the resulting PIF charged to permit applicants will then be proportionately adjusted to the scale that's based on the city's adopted park impact fee, which is about 78% of the maximum allowed park impact fee. And that is unless council decided that it wanted to change that park impact fee that was adopted 2 years ago. And so just to show what that would result in, so as FCS noted, the minimum and maximum, so minimum dwelling unit size, 622 square feet or less would be the park impact fee, $812. The maximum dwelling unit size or more of 3,124 square feet would be charged $4,077. And then the average, if a permit came in that equaled the average dwelling unit size historically in Federal Way, it would be charged what would be the equivalent of what council adopted in 2023, the 2,200. And you can see the other increments for 1,000 square feet and 2,500 square feet. The second policy proposal is to, as part of this, in addition to the fee schedule update, there will be a code amendment that will change references to this methodology. We also propose adding a section in the park impact fee chapter, similar to a section that we have in the traffic impact fee chapter and the school impact fee chapter, which allows us to increase the park impact fee with inflation, but starting in 2029 to ensure that there's some predictability for the next few years. And so that would be baked into code. And then we would still have to consider in the meantime which method, either indexing to the engineering news record cost index for the Seattle area or the consumer price index. But either way, giving ourselves the ability as a city to increase the park impact fee with inflation, as was recommended in the PIF study that was adopted in 2023. So some next steps, if council would like, we could come back for additional briefing or briefings, but we're hoping this is on track for a public hearing to adopt the code amendment portion of this update in March. In either March or April, we would take it to FedRAC for action, and then in April or May, council first and second reads with adoption by the end of June, which would be required to meet the state's deadline for complying with 5258. So are there any questions?
To start with Councilmember Walsh.
Yeah, a couple of questions. First, with the new requirements that we'll be implementing to allow 4 to 6 units on a lot, would each of those be considered a single-family unit, or would additional ones be ADUs, or how would that work?
I think if somebody was proposing once we adopt or update our code consistent with the middle housing bill that would allow maybe duplexes, triplexes, sixplexes, et cetera, on what's currently zoned single family. If they were attached units, they'd probably be considered townhomes. But the park impact fee it's not based on the type of unit as far as multifamily versus single family. It's with this update, it would be based on the square footage, regardless of whether that was a multifamily unit or a single family unit. But to answer your specific question, it's likely that if somebody was proposing a duplex or a fourplex, it would probably be attached side-by-side units, in which case that would probably meet the definition of a townhouse, as opposed to stacked multifamily, which is one unit on top of another.
And so whether it was a townhouse or stacked multifamily, what does that?
That would have no effect on the park impact fee. What would affect the park impact fee is the size of the unit.
Okay.
So you could have a tiny single-family house and a giant multifamily unit. It would be based on the square footage.
All right. And then secondly, a related question that I don't know whether you're prepared to answer. Since we implemented the park impact fees, how much have we collected in park impact fees?
Since mid-2023, so about a year and a half, through the end of 2024, we collected about $60,000, which is equal to about 27 housing units, which probably sounds low. And a big reason for that is because a lot of our units were vested prior to that, because the vesting language in that code, it also refers to the if the earliest complete development permit was vested, came in the 2 years before that code was adopted, then all of those units aren't subject to the park impact fee. So I think as we go forward, we'll see a much bigger uptick in our collection of fees.
All right. I'm just impressed that you knew the number. I mean,
I assumed you were going to ask that. So our permit sender was very helpful, and they had the number right away. So.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Daniel?
Yeah, 2 questions kind of following up on the other council member. The first one's going to be, is this, so I'm a little confused. This is a fee on parks that are being assigned to houses. Is this in lieu of green space, or is even if you have the green space, you still pay the park fee?
This is even if you have the green space, you still pay the park impact fee. So there's still a separate requirement for some developments. For example, subdivisions that are more than 5 lots. Those are still subject to our open space requirements, and quite often those could pay a fee in lieu. Some types of developments are not allowed to pay the fee in lieu, but that's a separate category of open space, whether it's provided on site or they're paying the fee in lieu. That's like a different category of funds. I think it has like even a separate account in our finance department, so it's treated separately.
So all buildings will require this one. The other one's only if you get to a certain size. Usually, there's the additional.
Correct. Yeah. So all residential dwelling units would be charged the park impact fee unless they met one of the exemptions that already exists in our code.
Okay. And the second question is kind of piggybacking on his comment. Assuming in a year from now that we have passed everything to get on board with the state wants, and we're doing the 6 individual units per plot or location, in that design, if you decide to take a house, bulldoze it, rebuild on it, if you do a 6-plex that turns into a townhouse, and all 1,000 square feet units, same size, would that be treated differently as if you decided to redevelop that as 6 independent dwelling units that are all 1,000 square feet too?
Would it be treated differently as far as how we'd apply the park impact fee?
Yes.
I don't think so. We would charge the park impact fee based on the number of units at that time that the development, whether, if it was a land use permit. Ultimately, the park impact fee is charged at the time of building permit, but it would just be based on those new units, even if they're redeveloping old units.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter what kind of configuration, it's the square footage?
The park impact fee would be based on the new square footage of those units.
Okay.
So like if it's a site that's redeveloping, if it's redeveloping with like double the square footage of dwelling units, it would be charge a park impact fee based on that new square footage, based on this new method.
So, give me one other question then. I got one more question for you then. Just so I make sure I understand clarity on that one. If it's raw land, is it treated any differently if it's going to be a redevelopment?
This, no.
Okay.
If it's, if you're talking about like an existing vacant lot where there's a new single family or townhouse proposed.
Yes.
I don't believe there's any, it would be treated differently. The one hesitation I have is, and Kent, maybe you can pull up in our code, we do have an exemption that addresses certain types of redevelopment, and I'm just not remembering if it was specific to mobile homes where those tend to swap out more frequently, or if it was broader to other types of redevelopment. So I'm punting to Kent for a second.
Sorry, what was the exact hypothetical?
It was a redevelopment of residential parcel. Whether we have anything on our exemptions list in 1992.
Yep, I'm there.
Okay.
What's the new thing it's getting changed into?
The question was, do we treat them differently if I have a raw piece of land, and I'm thinking about the new future of how we're looking at it. Raw piece of land, I build 6 units, whether they're attached or detached, doesn't matter, but 1,000 square feet each, so it's 6,000. The other one would be you have a house on a quarter acre, I buy it, I bulldoze it, I want to redevelop it into the same 6 1,000 square feet units on that. Do we treat them differently, or is it redevelopment is new construction no matter how you look at it?
Generally, the answer is that redevelopment is new construction, no matter how you look at it, with one exception. And the one exception is replacement of a structure with a new structure with the exact same use and gross floor area within 12 months.
So if you tore up a mobile home, stuck a house on top of it, that would be the exemption then?
Yeah, so if you had, for instance, if you had an existing single family, you tore that down and within 12 months built a new single family with the exact same gross floor area, that would not be subject to a new impact fee. But the situation where you tear down a single family residence and then build a 6-plex afterward, that's not going to be the same use, because now we have a 6-plex as opposed to a single family, so that it's not going to be exempt. And to your original point, it's going to be identical to the situation where you built a 6-plex on raw land. Either way, it'll be the same.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Walsh?
Yeah, just one more quick question. Back to the inflation thing. I mean, just a comment. It seems to me, I mean, our park impact fees are the lowest in the area, which I mean, we intentionally did that in order to encourage growth. However, inflation is a very real thing. It seems like as low as it is, that there really wouldn't be a need to wait until the 2029 to adjust for inflation. You said that you wanted to give, not surprise, I mean, keep, what was the term you used?
Predictability.
Predictability, yes, predictability. It seems like it's low enough that it would not be a significant change with making a problem with predictability if it was, in 2026 rather than 2029.
I mean, if council wanted to kind of give some direction on that, whether, because we can write the ordinance to just kick it into effect immediately or wait 1 year or 3 years. I think the thinking was when the PIF was adopted in '23, there was a lot of consideration about predictability for development. And so if council wants us to just take out that provision in our code to wait till 2029 or set a
It
different
seems to
year.
me as though that's just a small margin, that it would not interfere with predictability in my.
I wouldn't have any problem with saying a year, give people predictability for a year and then go for inflation after that.
I'm going to weigh on that. I'd say 26, 20, I'd say 27-ish, because I figure it's a year to two for
Yeah.
a developer, so, yeah.
Okay. So I have a couple follow-up questions now that we've heard from our other seatmates. I think 1,600 square feet is too big. I think we need to ratchet that down to about 1,200. Although our average is probably 1,686 going forward, we're not going to be building big houses. We're going to be building smaller dwelling units. And so if you go in at 1,600, even though that's your average over the life of Federal Way, you're starting out way too high. So are we bound by having to have 1,600, or can we ratchet it down to what reality is, which is probably 1,100 going forward?
I think FCS has some insights on that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. We use 1686 because that's what the historical
Right.
data tells us, but your point is well taken. If the city develops differently in the future, and by differently, it doesn't just mean that average dwelling unit sizes get smaller. It would also mean that the number of occupants per square foot goes up, I guess. So we would have to see that relationship changing in order for the fee to, in order to choose a lower or a different relationship. But I guess what I would encourage the city to do is forecast as specifically as possible, as analytically as possible, sort of what future development might look like that would be different from what we've seen historically, so that we've still got an analytically based approach, if that makes sense.
Well, if you look at geography, we don't have the space to build big houses, and we've got 11,000 plus dwelling units we're supposed to take on, and we all know it's going to be apartments, townhouses, and they're not going to be anywhere near 1,600 square feet based on what we see happening and what's happened around the region. I mean, I don't know how you can, analytics tell me that 1,600 is not going to be our average.
Well, the unit fee is based on population.
Right.
So whether those are multifamily dwelling units, or large single-family homes, which, again, your point is well taken that they probably won't be. If the city's adding the same number of people in either case, then this should be revenue neutral,
But
regardless of which of those approaches is taken, and the average doesn't really matter.
But the revenue neutral, most of these places that we've heard about that have come in are going to be probably 2 people, 2.1, because we went through this on school impact fees. The new places are going to have less people, but they're going to demand more services because they're going to be in tighter, more dense areas. So we're going to have the parks. And so I just think we're putting ourselves at risk of being able to supply the amount of parks what the fee's supposed to do if we use a higher average instead of something that's actually going to be realistic. I mean, you're the expert. I mean, how do you defend that?
Again, because the fee is based on population in general, again, your point is very well taken. I think we would want to work with staff about trying to forecast what future development might actually look like that would be different from the historical information, and we could take a look at that. I mean, we could build that in. recalculate it and see what it does. Absolutely.
I think at a baseline from the legal perspective, as long as we can defensively model in the future and say, this is what we predict the trends are going to be over time in Federal Way because of X, Y, and Z, and therefore, based on that, we're going to adopt a PIF that's different from what the current numbers show. I think as long as we can do that defensively, that's a fine way of doing it.
Okay. I mean, my colleagues up here, do you have a problem if we ask the staff to look at a smaller square foot? Okay.
Can I ask one clarification for FCS?
Yeah.
Is it sounds like it's more than just, like, we know as staff that our future development is likely going to be significantly smaller size than
Sure.
if you look back at the last 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
But it sounded like there was an additional component, which is we'd have to show that, like, the relationship between dwelling unit size and occupancy is changing. Is that
Well-
a correct way of saying that? So that there's like an additional data piece that we might need to show in order to make it defensible? Or-
Well, I don't know how you do the data thing, but we know that all the I believe, I mean, I don't know, it's not an absolute, but the development we're going to see is going to be much smaller dwelling unit per place people go to. And so and we want to get $2,200. We're the lowest there is, so why go lower when we know development is going to be smaller? I mean, we picked 2,200 because that was the number we thought we needed to buy the property we're going to need for the new population. And so we need to go lower, or we got to go like Kirkland and say, okay, it's now $14,000 a door because we're going to need the same services, or whatever their number was. So we're cutting our revenues by using 1,600 when we went with 2,200 because we thought that was fair and we could buy property. And if we are going to go 50% of that for the smaller places, or 80%, then we should have raised our number.
I have a question for clarity.
What's that?
I have a question for clarity. Are you saying if we drop it down to 1,200 square feet, the 2,200 would represent the 1,200 square feet?
Correct.
Okay,
That's what I'm.
gotcha. So it'd be,
advocating we
the
should
average would now be, instead of 1,600 as 22, it'd be 1,200 as 22.
Because if we don't do that, 5 years from now, when we're doing all these small projects, it's going to be just like the revenue we get for 1% per year. That's all we can do, or whatever the number is. And we're shooting ourselves in our foot today by making it 1,600 square feet. The council.
So just for additional food for thought, at 1,200 square feet, the math would show a little less than 2 people per dwelling unit, 1.93 people
It's
per dwelling unit.
2 people and a dog. They're going to need a dog park. I mean, so.
I mean, another way practically of achieving what you're talking about, and I think you already said this yourself, Chair, is that we could just, instead of 2,200, where we artificially limited ourselves to 2,200 when we could have charged 2,900, we could keep the average household size, but just increase the number to a higher number than 2,200, somewhere in between there and the max that we'd be allowed to charge.
But we didn't want to go higher because we wanted to be the place people want to come develop.
Fair enough.
I mean, we lost out all the development because we were $22,000 a door for school fees. I mean, we're the desert for development now because nobody came here. So we don't want to go higher, but by making it more square feet, we're basically cutting ourselves out again, just like we did with the school fees back in the day. So anyway, I would like to see it come back at a lower square footage so we can keep 2,200 instead of raise our fees.
Okay.
Is that okay with everybody up here? Or am I the only one feeling that way? Okay. And it comes to your committee at FedRAC, so you get to.
Well, I'll make my comment when I see the actual numbers.
Yeah, okay. Okay, anything else on the agenda we need to bring up? Anybody else have anything they'd like to share? Okay, we will now adjourn. Our next meeting will be February 3rd, 2025 at 5 o'clock.
Thank you.